The howling blizzard nearly stole her last breath as Eliza Armstrong collapsed in the deep snow, her fingers blue and her hope fading with each labored heartbeat. She had been traveling for days after fleeing a situation no woman should endure, and now the merciless Wyoming winter seemed determined to claim her life where human cruelty had failed. Aaron Vaughn pulled his sheepskin coat tighter against the relentless wind. It was December 1876, and the punishing storm had descended upon his isolated ranch just outside La Junta, Colorado, with a vengeance that matched his mood. 3 years of solitude had hardened him like the frozen ground beneath his boots, but something instinct or perhaps divine intervention had pulled him from his cabin that evening to check the fence line once more before darkness fell completely. That's when he saw her, a dark shape against the pristine white, barely visible through the swirling snow. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks, conjuring ghosts to haunt his lonely existence. But as he drew closer, the unmistakable form of a woman materialized, half buried in a drift, motionless as the winter still land around them. "Dear God," Aaron muttered, dismounting from his horse with a speed that belied his 30 years. His gloved hands brushed away the snow from her face, young, perhaps mid-20s, with delicate features now pale as moonlight. A faint cloud of breath escaped her blue-tinged lips, so faint he almost missed it. "Madam, can you hear me?" He gently shook her shoulder, receiving no response. Without hesitation, Aaron lifted her limp body into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, bundled in clothing inadequate for the harsh territory. He settled her before him on his horse, cradling her against his chest as he urged his faithful stallion back toward the sanctuary of his cabin. The journey seemed interminable, the wind cutting through his clothes and the woman's shallow breathing a constant reminder of how precarious her situation remained. His cabin appeared through the blinding white, a small, sturdy structure he'd built with his own hands after leaving behind a life he preferred not to remember. Inside, Aaron worked quickly, stoking the dying embers in the fireplace until flames licked greedily at fresh logs. He laid the woman on his bed, then hesitated. Her clothes were soaked through, a death sentence in this cold. Propriety warred with practicality before the latter won out. "Forgive me, madam," he murmured, carefully removing her frozen outer garments. He worked efficiently, preserving her modesty by keeping her underclothes intact and quickly wrapping her in every blanket he owned. He rubbed her hands and feet, willing circulation back into her extremities, and placed heated stones wrapped in flannel near her core. Hours passed as Aaron maintained his vigil. He spooned broth between her lips whenever she seemed conscious enough to swallow, wiped her brow when fever replaced the deathly cold, and spoke softly about inconsequential things: the weather, his horse, the books he'd read during the long winter evenings, anything to tether her to the world of the living. Dawn was breaking when her eyes finally opened, fully deep brown eyes that regarded him with momentary confusion before widening in alarm. "Easy now," Aaron said, his voice deliberately gentle. "You're safe. Found you in the snow yesterday. Thought you might not make it through the night." The woman tried to speak but managed only a raspy cough. Aaron helped her sip water before she tried again. "Thank you," she whispered. "My name is Eliza Armstrong." "Aaron Vaughn," he replied with a nod. "You're at my ranch about 4 miles outside of La Junta, Colorado." Her voice carried surprise. "I thought I was still in Wyoming." Aaron's eyebrows rose. "Wyoming's a fair piece north of here. How long were you wandering?" Eliza closed her eyes, fatigue evident in every line of her face. "I don't know anymore. The days, they blurred together after a while." "Rest now," Aaron said, standing. "Questions can wait until you're stronger." But as he turned to leave, her hand shot out from beneath the blankets, catching his wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she said, her eyes now filled with unmistakable fear. "Are you alone here?" "Is there anyone else?" The question struck Aaron as odd, but he answered truthfully. "Just me and the livestock, nearest neighbors 5 miles west." Relief softened her features as she released his wrist. "Thank you," she said again, already drifting back to sleep. Aaron watched her for a moment, noting the way tension remained in her shoulders even in slumber. He'd seen that wariness before in wounded animals and in men who'd survived battles. Something or someone had hunted this woman, driven her to the point of death in a snowstorm. As he moved about his daily chores, Aaron found his thoughts returning to the mysterious woman in his bed. 3 years he'd spent avoiding entanglements of any sort, focusing solely on building his small ranch into something sustainable. He'd left behind the complications of people when he'd ridden away from St. Louis, preferring the honest company of cattle and horses to the duplicitous nature of humans. Yet here he was, harboring a stranger with secrets clearly heavy enough to drive her into a blizzard. Common decency, he told himself. Nothing more than what any man would do. But even as he thought it, Aaron knew he was lying to himself. Eliza slept through most of that day, waking only when Aaron coaxed her to take broth or water. By evening, her fever had broken and some color had returned to her cheeks. She managed to sit up against the pillows when he brought her a bowl of stew. "This is delicious," she said after several cautious spoonfuls. "You're quite the cook, Mr. Vaughn." "Aaron," he corrected. "And necessity teaches a man many things. Been on my own a while now." Eliza nodded, studying him openly for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered skin that spoke of years under the sun. His dark blonde hair fell just past his collar, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, deep blue and intelligent, carrying shadows she recognized all too well. "How long have you been in Colorado?" she asked. 3 years this spring." Aaron settled into the chair beside the bed. "Came from Missouri originally. And you've been alone all that time." A flicker of something pain perhaps crossed his face. "By choice, madam." Eliza recognized the gentle rebuff and changed the subject. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. Once the storm passes, storms past," Aaron interrupted. "But there's 3 feet of snow out there and you couldn't make it to town in your condition. Besides," he added, gesturing to the window where darkness had fallen, "where would you go?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Eliza stared into her bowl, avoiding his gaze. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." Aaron nodded, unsurprised. "Well, you're welcome here until you're well enough to decide." "I'll be taking the sofa." Before she could protest, he stood and took the empty bowl from her hands. "Get some rest, Miss Armstrong. Morning comes early on a ranch." True to his word, Aaron was up before dawn. He moved quietly through his morning routine, tending to the animals in the barn before returning to prepare breakfast. He was surprised to find Eliza awake, wrapped in one of his blankets and seated at the small table. "You should be resting," he said, frowning. "I've imposed enough." She straightened her spine despite the obvious effort it cost her. "I'd like to help if I may. It's the least I can do." Aaron wanted to argue but recognized the determination in her eyes. "Can you cook?" he asked instead. A genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. "Better than most." "Then breakfast is yours if you're up to it. Nothing fancy, just coffee, eggs, and biscuits if you've a mind to make them." As they settled into this new arrangement, Aaron found himself studying Eliza when she wasn't looking. She moved with a natural grace that even weakness couldn't diminish. Her chestnut hair, now clean and dry, fell in waves past her shoulders when she let it down to brush it. But most striking was the quiet resilience that seemed to radiate from her slender frame, a strength at odds with the fragile woman he'd found in the snow. Over the following days, Eliza gradually regained her strength. She insisted on helping around the cabin, first with cooking and mending, then with more strenuous tasks as her body recovered. Aaron found himself enjoying her company more than he cared to admit, especially during the long evenings when they sat by the fire. Eliza proved to be well-read, surprising him with her knowledge of literature and current events. She spoke eloquently about books he'd read during his solitary winters, offering perspectives he'd never considered. Yet for all her openness on these topics, she remained guarded about her past. A week after her arrival, as they finished supper, Aaron decided it was time to broach the subject that had been weighing on him. "Eliza," he began, noting how she tensed at his serious tone, "I'm not one to pry into matters that aren't my business, but I need to know if there's trouble following you." Her hands stilled on the dish she was drying. "Why do you ask?" "Because a woman doesn't nearly freeze to death in a blizzard unless she's running from something worse than the cold." He kept his voice gentle but firm. "And if danger's coming to my door, I'd like some warning." Eliza placed the dish carefully on the table before meeting his gaze. The fire's glow cast shadows across her face, highlighting the subtle fear that never quite left her eyes. "I was married," she said finally, "in Cheyenne. My husband, Richard, was a businessman with interests in the railroad. We met when I was working as a teacher newly arrived from Boston. He was charming, established, everything a young woman is taught to want." She twisted the dish towel in her hands. "But once we were married, he changed. Or perhaps the man I thought I knew was never real to begin with." Aaron remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "The first time he struck me, he apologized for days, brought gifts, promised it would never happen again." A bitter smile touched her lips. "I believed him. The second time, the apologies were briefer. By the fourth time, he no longer bothered with them at all." Aaron's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "I tried to leave once, 6 months ago. He found me at the stage depot and brought me home. What followed?" She shuddered. "I didn't try again until I heard him discussing me with a friend. He said if I caused any more problems, he knew people who could ensure I had a tragic accident." "So you ran," Aaron supplied when she fell silent. Eliza nodded. "I took what money I could find and left in the night, traveled south, avoiding towns where he might have connections. Then the storm hit and she gestured helplessly. You know the rest." Aaron absorbed her story, anger building in his chest, not directed at her, but at the man who had driven her to such desperate measures. "Does he know you came this way?" "I don't think so. I was heading for New Mexico originally, but I got disoriented in the storm." Her eyes met his, vulnerable yet determined. "I understand if you want me to leave. I've brought nothing but risk to your door." "No," Aaron said firmly. "You'll stay until you're fully recovered at the very least." "This Richard, does he have the means to track you this far?" "He has money and friends in high places, if he's determined enough." She left the thought unfinished. Aaron stood, his decision made. "Then we'll be ready if he comes, but you're safe here, Eliza. You have my word on that." The conviction in his voice seemed to ease something in her, and she nodded gratefully. "Thank you." That night, as Aaron lay on the uncomfortable sofa, staring at the ceiling, he pondered the unexpected turn his solitary life had taken. He'd fled his own past instinct. Louis, the failed business partnership that had cost him everything, the fiancé who'd chosen security over love, the family name tarnished by accusations of fraud. He'd come to Colorado to escape, to build something honest with his own 2 hands. And now here he was, promising protection to a woman with troubles of her own. The irony wasn't lost on him. Yet something about Eliza Armstrong stirred feelings he'd thought long buried, protective instincts, certainly, but also a growing admiration for her courage and a deepening appreciation for her company. Dangerous territory, he reminded himself. She was vulnerable, dependent on his help. Any feelings beyond neighborly concern would be taking advantage. Besides, once fully recovered, she'd likely continue her journey, seeking a place where her husband couldn't find her. The thought of her leaving created an unexpected hollow sensation in his chest, one Aaron promptly tried to ignore as he finally drifted into uneasy sleep. The following weeks established a rhythm to their shared existence. The deep snow made travel to town impossible, isolating them in a world of white. Aaron taught Eliza about ranch life, how to care for the small herd of cattle he kept in the barn during the worst weather, how to manage the chickens, how to repair tack and tools. For her part, Eliza brought organization and comfort to his Spartan cabin. She rearranged furniture to create more space, mended clothing he'd neglected, and prepared meals that made him realize how poorly he'd been feeding himself. More importantly, she brought conversation and laughter back into a home that had known neither for too long. During a particularly bitter cold spell in mid-January, they spent an entire day indoors. Aaron showed Eliza how to play chess, a game he hadn't enjoyed since leaving St. Louis. She proved a quick study, her strategic mind challenging him by the third game. "Checkmate," she announced with a triumphant smile. Aaron studied the board in disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned," he caught himself. "Pardon my language." Eliza laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as the weeks passed. "I grew up with 3 brothers, Aaron. I've heard worse. 3 brothers, that's the first you've mentioned family." He reset the chess pieces, watching her expression carefully, her smile dimmed slightly. "Yes. They're all back east, my parents too in Massachusetts. They don't know what happened with your husband," Eliza shook her head. "We drifted apart after I married. Richard preferred I not maintain close ties with them." She moved a pawn forward. "Your move." Aaron recognized her deflection, but respected it. Everyone had aspects of their past they preferred to leave undisturbed. Instead, he countered her move and asked, "Where did you learn to cook like you do? Those biscuits this morning would make a hardened criminal confess his sins." The tension eased from her shoulders as she laughed again. "My grandmother, she believed a lady should be accomplished in the kitchen regardless of her station, said a woman who could cook well would never lack for admirers. Smart woman, your grandmother." Their eyes met across the board, and something shifted in the air between them, an awareness that had been building gradually since her arrival. Eliza looked away first, focusing intently on the chess pieces. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked after several moves in silence. Aaron considered the question. "Used to think solitude was what I wanted after everything in St. Louis." He trailed off, realizing he'd never told her about his past. "What happened there?" Eliza asked softly. Aaron hadn't spoken of it to anyone since arriving in Colorado. The words felt rusty as he began. "Had a business partner, Thomas Blackwell. We ran a shipping company on the Mississippi. Did well for several years until I discovered he'd been embezzling from our clients and creditors. He moved a night with more force than necessary. By the time I uncovered the full extent, he disappeared with most of our capital. Left me to face the accusations, the lawsuits, the public humiliation." "That's terrible," Eliza said, genuine sympathy in her voice. "Couldn't you prove your innocence?" "Eventually, but by then the damage was done. My reputation was ruined, even my fiancé." He swallowed hard. Catherine decided a disgraced businessman wasn't the suitable match her family had hoped for. Understanding dawned in Eliza's eyes. "So you left everything behind and came here." "Seemed easier than rebuilding where everyone knew the story. Wanted honest work, where a man's word and the sweat of his brow were all that mattered." Aaron's lips curved in a rueful smile. "Never planned on becoming a hermit exactly, just happened that way." "Until you found a half-frozen woman in a snowdrift," Eliza added softly. "Until then," he agreed, holding her gaze. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over them both. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls, but inside, something fragile and new was taking root, a connection neither had expected to find. As January gave way to February, the worst of winter's grip began to loosen. The snow remained deep, but clear days allowed Aaron to resume some outdoor work. Eliza insisted on helping. Bundled in spare clothing, he'd provided items far too large for her slender frame but practical nonetheless. One crisp morning, they worked together to clear a path to the barn. The physical labor brought color to Eliza's cheeks and a lightness to her step that Aaron couldn't help but notice. "You look better," he observed as they paused to rest. "Stronger." "I feel better," she admitted. In many ways, something in her tone made him study her more carefully. Your husband, do you think he's still searching for you? Eliza's expression sobered. Richard doesn't surrender what he considers his property easily, but it's been over a month now. Perhaps he's decided I'm not worth the trouble. Any man who treated you as he did never deserved you in the first place, Aaron said, the words emerging before he could consider their implications. Surprise flickered across Eliza's face, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with exertion. Thank you for saying that. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when one of the horses nickered from the barn. Better finish up here, Aaron said gruffly. Storm clouds building to the north. They worked side by side for another hour, the physical activity a welcome distraction from the growing awareness between them. When they finally returned to the cabin, cheeks flushed from cold and effort, Eliza began preparing lunch while Aaron stoked the fire. As they ate, Eliza broached the subject they'd been avoiding. The trail to town, will it be passable soon? Aaron felt an inexplicable surge of disappointment at the question. Another week of this weather should clear the worst sections. Why, you anxious to leave? No, she said quickly, then more measured. But I can't stay here indefinitely. You've been more than generous, but I need to establish myself somewhere. Begin again. And where would that be? Aaron kept his tone neutral despite the tightness in his chest. Eliza hesitated. I thought perhaps Santa Fe. It's far enough from Wyoming that Richard's influence shouldn't reach there. I could teach again or find work as a seamstress. Alone. The word carried more concern than Aaron intended. I've managed alone before, she replied, a flicker of her hard-won independence showing in her lifted chin. That's not what I meant. Aaron pushed his plate aside, searching for the right words. La Junta's growing. The railroad brings new people through regularly. School might need a teacher come spring. Eliza's eyes widened slightly as she grasped his implication. Are you suggesting I stay in La Junta? Might be safer than striking out for territory you don't know. He met her gaze steadily, and you wouldn't be completely alone. The offer hung between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Eliza looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together in her lap. Why would you do that for me? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aaron considered his answer carefully. Because in the past month, this cabin has felt more like a home than it has in 3 years. Because you deserve a chance to build something good after what you've endured. He paused, then added quietly, because I've grown accustomed to your company, Eliza, and I'm not eager to return to silence. The confession cost him something in pride, but Aaron had learned long ago that honesty, however uncomfortable, was always preferable to regret. Eliza's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I've imposed on your kindness far too long already. It's not an imposition when it's freely given. Aaron reached across the table, his weathered hand covering her smaller one. Think about it, that's all I'm asking. No need to decide today, she nodded, turning her hand to briefly squeeze his before withdrawing it. I will think about it. The following days brought a noticeable shift in their interactions. A new awareness colored even the most mundane exchanges, creating both distance and a heightened sensitivity to each other's presence. Aaron found himself noticing details he'd overlooked before, the way Eliza hummed softly while kneading bread dough, how she always tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating, the quiet strength evident in everything she did. For her part, Eliza observed Aaron with new eyes as well. She admired his patient handling of the livestock, the careful precision with which he maintained his tools, the respect he showed for the harsh land that sustained them. Most of all, she treasured his uncomplicated honesty, a quality so different from the calculated charm that had blinded her to Richard's true nature. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Aaron asked a question that had been weighing on him. If you stayed in La Junta, he began cautiously, what would you want, from life, I mean? Eliza considered the question, watching the dancing flames. Peace primarily, safety, she glanced at him, the freedom to make my own choices. And beyond that, a soft smile touched her lips. I'd like to teach again. I miss the children, their curiosity, their unguarded joy in discovery. Her expression grew wistful. Someday I'd hope to have a family of my own, children raised with love and respect, not fear. Aaron nodded, absorbing her words. Sounds like worthy ambitions. And you? Eliza turned the question back to him. What do you want from life, Aaron Vaughn? The directness of her gaze made evasion impossible. For a long time, all I wanted was to be left alone, to build something honest with my own hands, beholden to no one. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But lately, I've been wondering if there might be more worth wanting, understanding passed between them, unspoken but clear. Eliza broke the charged silence first. I should check on the bread for tomorrow, she said, rising from her chair. Aaron watched her move about the kitchen, her presence having transformed the utilitarian space into something warm and inviting. He realized with sudden clarity that the idea of this cabin without her had become unthinkable. The weather continued to improve, and by mid-February, Aaron deemed the trail to town passable enough for a journey. They needed supplies, and he sensed Eliza might benefit from seeing La Junta before making her decision about staying. We'll take the wagon, he announced over breakfast. Should make it to town by midday if we leave within the hour. Eliza looked both excited and apprehensive. Will it be safe? Aaron understood her concern went beyond road conditions. La Junta's small, but the sheriff's competent. And I doubt news of a missing wife from Cheyenne would have reached this far south, especially with communication disrupted by winter weather. She nodded, though anxiety still shadowed her eyes. I'll get ready. The journey to town proved challenging but manageable. Aaron had cleared the worst drifts from the ranch entrance, and the main trail showed signs of recent use by other travelers. Eliza sat beside him on the wagon seat, bundled against the cold but clearly enjoying the change of scenery after weeks confined to the ranch. It's beautiful, she said, gazing at the vast landscape of white broken by stands of winter bare cottonwoods along a distant creek bed. Harsh, but beautiful. Aaron glanced at her profile, struck by how the bright sunlight illuminated her features. Yes, he agreed, not entirely referring to the scenery. La Junta greeted them with the bustle typical of a frontier town serving as a supply point for surrounding ranches. The railroad had brought growth and diversity to what had once been little more than a trading post. As they pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store, Aaron noted Eliza's widened eyes taking in the activity. Bigger than you expected, he asked, helping her down from the wagon. Much, she admitted. I hadn't realized so many people lived here. Railroad makes all the difference. Town's grown considerably just in the 3 years I've been here. He offered his arm. Shall we? Inside the general store, they were greeted warmly by the proprietor, Samuel Miller, a rotund man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Aaron Vaughn. Thought you might have frozen solid out there at your place. His curious gaze fell on Eliza. And who might this lovely lady be? Aaron felt Eliza tense beside him and smoothly intervened. Samuel, this is Miss Eliza Armstrong, my cousin from back east. She's visiting for a spell. Eliza shot him a grateful look before extending her hand to the shopkeeper. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Miller. Likewise, Miss Armstrong. Welcome to La Junta. Samuel beamed. We don't often see Aaron with company. Man's been something of a recluse since settling here. So I've gathered, Eliza replied with a small smile. As they collected the supplies they needed, Aaron discreetly pointed out various establishments through the store window, the schoolhouse where Eliza might find employment, the small church that doubled as a meeting hall, the hotel where new arrivals often stayed until finding permanent lodgings. They were loading their purchases into the wagon when a woman's voice called out, Aaron Vaughn, is that you? Aaron turned to see Martha Collins, the blacksmith's wife and one of the few people in town he considered a friend, approaching with a broad smile. Martha, he greeted her. How's Frank's leg healing? Much better, thanks to that liniment you sent over. Martha's gaze shifted to Eliza with undisguised curiosity. "Won't you introduce me to your companion?" Aaron performed the introduction, maintaining the cousin fiction. Martha immediately took Eliza's hands in her own. "It's wonderful to meet you. We've all wondered about Aaron's family back east. You must join us for dinner before you return. Frank would love to thank you properly for the liniment," she added to Aaron. "That's very kind," Eliza said, seeming genuinely touched by the warm welcome. As they spoke, Aaron noticed a rider stop across the street, observing them with more interest than seemed casual. The man was well-dressed, clearly not a local, and something about his calculating assessment set Aaron's instincts on edge. "We should be heading back," he said, cutting the conversation short. "Want to beat any afternoon weather that might blow in." Martha looked disappointed but nodded. "Of course, but do consider dinner soon. Perhaps next week." They promised to do so, and Aaron helped Eliza back onto the wagon seat, keeping a watchful eye on the stranger, who had now dismounted and was speaking to a man outside the telegraph office. "What is it?" Eliza asked, noting his distraction. "Probably nothing," Aaron replied, though he didn't entirely believe it. "Let's get home." The return journey was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. Only when the ranch came into view did Eliza speak again. "You called it home," she observed. "Just now you said let's get home." Aaron hadn't realized his choice of words. "Force of habit, I suppose." "No," Eliza said softly. "I think it was more than that." Their eyes met briefly before Aaron returned his attention to guiding the horses into the barn. The moment lingered between them, unresolved but significant. That evening, as they sorted through their purchases, Eliza seemed preoccupied. Aaron gave her space, sensing she was processing the day's experiences and perhaps weighing her options regarding her future. After supper, she finally broke her silence. "I've been thinking about your suggestion, about staying in La Junta." Aaron set down the harness he'd been repairing and gave her his full attention. "And I liked what I saw today. It seems like a community where a person might belong." She traced the grain of the wooden table with one finger. The school did look like it could use a proper teacher. Hope rose in Aaron's chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "Is that what you want then, to stay?" Eliza met his gaze directly. "What I want is complicated, Aaron. I've made one disastrous decision in trusting a man. I won't rush into another situation without careful thought." "I'm not Richard," Aaron said quietly. "No, you're not," she agreed, "which is precisely why I need to be certain of my own mind. If I stay, it needs to be for the right reasons, not gratitude or fear or other feelings that might not withstand time and reality." Aaron respected her candor, even as it stirred both concern and admiration. "Fair enough. Take whatever time you need. Thank you." She stood, gathering dishes from the table. "And thank you for introducing me as your cousin today. It was quick thinking." Seemed the simplest explanation. "Folks around here don't gossip much, but they do notice things." He picked up his repair work again. "Though I should warn you, Martha Collins will have spread the news to half the town by now. She means well, but she's never met a piece of information she didn't want to share." This brought a small smile to Eliza's lips. "She seemed kind. She is one of the good ones." They settled back into comfortable silence, but Aaron's mind remained active. The stranger in town had troubled him more than he let on. While it could have been innocent, perhaps a cattle buyer or someone scouting land, Aaron had learned to trust his instincts. Something about the man's deliberate observation had raised his hackles. As the evening wore on, he made a mental note to be more vigilant in the coming days. If Richard Armstrong had indeed tracked his wife this far south, Aaron intended to be prepared. The following morning dawned clear and cold. Aaron rose early as usual, tending to the livestock before returning to the cabin for breakfast. He was surprised to find Eliza already dressed for the day, a determined set to her shoulders. "I'd like to learn to shoot," she announced without preamble as he entered. Aaron paused in the doorway, processing her unexpected request. "May I ask why?" "Because I never want to feel helpless again." Her eyes held a mixture of resolve and vulnerability that struck him to his core. In Cheyenne, I had no means to protect myself. I won't live that way anymore. Aaron nodded slowly, understanding and respecting her reasoning. I can teach you. After breakfast. True to his word, Aaron set up targets behind the barn tin cans on fence posts at varying distances. He chose his smallest revolver for her, a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson that wouldn't overwhelm her with its recoil. First rule, he said, standing beside her, always treat every gun as if it's loaded, even when you know it isn't. Eliza listened attentively as he explained the basic mechanics, how to load and unload safely, how to hold the weapon properly. When it came time for her first shot, he positioned himself behind her, adjusting her stance with gentle hands on her shoulders. Breathe in, he instructed, his voice close to her ear. Then exhale slowly as you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull, squeeze. Eliza followed his guidance, flinching slightly at the report but holding her ground. The bullet missed the can by several inches, kicking up dirt beyond the target. That's normal, Aaron assured her. Try again. They continued for nearly an hour. By the end, Eliza had hit the closest target 3 times and grazed the middle distance can once. Her hands were steady, her concentration impressive. You're a natural, Aaron said as they walked back to the cabin. With practice, you'll be a fine shot. Thank you. Eliza's expression was thoughtful. It feels different than I expected, not just the power of the weapon, but the control. That's the important part to remember. A gun is just a tool like an axe or a plow. It's the person wielding it that matters. Eliza nodded, absorbing his words. Could we practice again tomorrow? Of course. For the next several days, they added target practice to their routine. Eliza proved a dedicated student, improving rapidly under Aaron's patient instruction. He found himself admiring her determination, the way she approached each lesson with focused intensity. One afternoon, as they returned from a particularly successful session, Aaron noticed a rider approaching from the direction of town. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle slung across his back. Get inside, he told Eliza, his tone leaving no room for argument. She complied immediately, though he caught the flash of fear in her eyes before she turned away. Aaron moved to the front of the cabin, positioning himself to meet the visitor while maintaining a clear line of retreat if necessary. As the rider drew closer, Aaron relaxed slightly. It was just Frank Collins, the blacksmith, his large frame unmistakable even at a distance. Afternoon, Aaron, Frank called as he reined his horse to a stop. Hope I'm not interrupting anything. Frank, bit of a surprise seeing you out this way. Aaron lowered his rifle but kept it ready. Martha said your leg was still giving you trouble. Better enough for riding, though she fusses. Frank dismounted with a slight grimace. Came to deliver a message, didn't trust it to paper. Aaron's wariness returned. What kind of message? Frank glanced toward the cabin. Martha suggested I speak to you alone. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of my cousin, Aaron replied evenly. Frank nodded, seeming unsurprised. Fair enough. There was a man in town yesterday asking questions about newcomers. Specifically about a woman who might have arrived recently. He met Aaron's gaze directly. Sheriff Tanner thought nothing of it until the man mentioned he was looking for his runaway wife from Wyoming. Aaron felt his muscles tense. Did he give a name? Called himself Richard Armstrong. Behind them, the cabin door opened and Eliza emerged, her face pale but composed. He's here? In La Junta, Frank turned to her, compassion evident in his weathered features. Not anymore, miss, left on the morning train east after speaking with the sheriff. He looked back at Aaron. Tanner told him he hadn't seen any strangers matching the description, said the man seemed frustrated but believed him. Relief washed through Aaron, though he maintained his caution. Why didn't the sheriff come himself to tell us? Thought it might draw attention if he rode out here. I was heading this direction anyway to check on the Peterson place. Frank shifted his weight, easing pressure on his injured leg. Martha figured out the truth as soon as the man mentioned Wyoming. She's good at piecing things together, my wife. Eliza stepped forward. Thank you for warning us, Mr. Collins, and please thank your wife as well. Frank nodded solemnly. Martha says to tell you that whatever brought you here is your business alone, but if you need help, you have friends in La Junta who don't take kindly to men who mistreat their wives. The simple offer of alliance from virtual strangers brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. That's very kind. Just neighborly, Frank replied with a shrug. Now I should be getting back before Martha sends out a search party. He remounted his horse with effort. Aaron might want to keep a watchful eye for a few days. Man like that making such a journey in winter, he's determined. Appreciated, Frank. Give our regards to Martha. As they watched the blacksmith ride away, Aaron felt Eliza trembling beside him. Without thinking, he put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. He'll be back, she whispered. Richard doesn't give up easily. Neither do I, Aaron replied, his voice hardened with resolve. And unlike him, I'm on my own land with the law and neighbors on my side. Eliza looked up at him, searching his face. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door. I should draw him away from here. Absolutely not. Aaron's arm tightened around her. Running won't solve this, Eliza. It's time to stand your ground. Inside the cabin, they discussed their options. Aaron insisted that Eliza continue her shooting practice, now with renewed purpose. They also established protocols for visitors. Eliza would remain out of sight until Aaron confirmed it was safe. That night, Aaron moved his bedroll in front of the door instead of taking the sofa as usual. The gesture wasn't lost on Eliza, who watched from across the room with complex emotions playing across her features. You don't have to do this, she said softly. This isn't your fight. Aaron looked up from checking his revolver. It became my fight the moment I found you in that snowdrift. Why? The question held genuine puzzlement. You owed me nothing, still don't. Aaron considered his answer carefully. When I left St. Louis, I thought I wanted solitude. Turned out what I really wanted was peace, and there's a difference. These past weeks with you here. He paused, searching for the right words. This cabin feels right with you in it, Eliza, like something that was missing has been found. The simple honesty of his declaration hung in the air between them. Eliza moved closer, kneeling beside his bedroll. I've been afraid to trust what I feel, she admitted. After Richard, I questioned my own judgment. Understandable. Aaron set the revolver aside, focusing entirely on her. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, just letting you know where I stand. Eliza reached out, her fingers lightly touching his hand. When I first woke in your cabin, I was terrified, not just of Richard finding me, but of being at the mercy of a stranger. A small smile softened her features. But you never made me feel like a burden or an obligation. You gave me space to heal both my body and my spirit. It wasn't entirely selfless, Aaron admitted. Having you here, it reminded me of things I'd forgotten, how to laugh. How to share a meal and really taste it. How to look forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. Eliza's hand closed around his. If I stay in La Junta, would you want? She stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. That is, could you see a future where Aaron turned his hand to clasp hers properly? Yes, he said simply. To whatever you're trying to ask, yes. The certainty in his voice brought fresh tears to her eyes, but these were different from the tears of fear she'd shed earlier. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Then I'll stay, she whispered. Once this is resolved one way or another. Aaron wanted nothing more than to close the remaining distance between them, but he restrained himself, respecting the boundaries she needed. Instead, he gently squeezed her hand. Get some rest, he said. I'll keep watch. Eliza nodded, rising reluctantly. At the bedroom door, she paused, looking back at him. Aaron, thank you for finding me in the snow. Thank you for bringing warmth back to this place, he replied. Her smile, genuine and unguarded, was the last thing he saw before she closed the door. The following days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Aaron went about his ranch duties with his rifle always within reach, while Eliza continued to practice her shooting with increasing accuracy. They limited trips to the barn. keeping mostly to the cabin where they could maintain better security. 4 days after Frank's warning visit, Aaron spotted dust on the horizon riders approaching from the direction of town. He called Eliza from the garden where she had been preparing soil for spring planting. "2 horsemen coming," he said, handing her his field glass. "Take a look." Eliza raised the glass to her eye, adjusting the focus. Her sharp intake of breath told him everything. "It's Richard," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "I don't recognize the man with him." Aaron took back the glass for a better look. The second rider appeared to be a hired gun, the type of man who sold his services to whoever paid the highest price. Both men were well mounted and armed. "Get inside," Aaron instructed. "Remember what we discussed." Eliza nodded, her hand briefly touching his arm before she retreated to the cabin. Aaron watched her go, admiring her composure in the face of her greatest fear. Then he turned back toward the approaching riders, his expression hardening into the mask he'd worn during his early days on the frontier, when survival often depended on a man's ability to project strength. The riders approached at a measured pace, clearly in no hurry. Aaron positioned himself in front of the cabin, rifle held casually but ready. He waited until they were within easy speaking distance before raising a hand in the universal gesture of caution. "That's far enough," he called. "State your business." The older of the 2 men, a well-dressed gentleman in his 40s with a meticulously groomed mustache, smiled thinly. "I'm looking for someone who may have passed this way. A young woman, my wife, who has unfortunately become confused about her situation." "Haven't seen any confused women around here," Aaron replied evenly. "Just my cattle and chickens. Perhaps I should introduce myself properly. I'm Richard Armstrong from Cheyenne." The man's smile never reached his cold eyes. "And you would be Aaron Vaughn. This is my ranch." "Mr. Vaughn, I have reason to believe my wife sought refuge in this area. The station master in La Junta mentioned a woman matching her description might be staying with a rancher outside town." Richard's tone remained cordial, though an edge of impatience had crept in. "Surely you understand my concern for her welfare." "Can't help you," Aaron said flatly. "No women here." The second man shifted in his saddle, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. Richard noticed Aaron's attention to the movement and smiled again. "This is Mr. Reed, my associate. The journey from Wyoming has been fraught with dangers. One can't be too careful these days." Aaron recognized the implied threat but maintained his composure. "Your concern for safety is understandable, Mr. Armstrong, but as I said, I can't help you." Richard studied the cabin behind Aaron with calculating eyes. "Perhaps I might water my horse at your well. The ride has been dusty." "Plenty of water at the creek 1/2 mile back," Aaron countered. "No need to trouble yourself coming any closer." For a long moment, tension stretched between them like a taut wire. Then Richard nodded, his smile now brittle. "As you wish, Mr. Vaughn, though I must say your hospitality leaves something to be desired." "Just a private man who values his solitude," Aaron replied, "indeed." Richard gathered his reins. "If you should happen to see a woman answering to the name of Eliza Armstrong, dark hair, brown eyes, slender build, I would appreciate you informing the sheriff in La Junta. There would, of course, be a generous reward. I'll keep that in mind." Richard touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Good day, then, Mr. Vaughn. I suspect we'll meet again." Aaron remained motionless, watching as the 2 men wheeled their horses and rode away. Only when they had disappeared beyond the ridge did he lower his rifle and release the breath he'd been holding. Inside the cabin, he found Eliza by the window, her father's old revolver clutched in trembling hands. She had heard everything. "He knows I'm here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was testing you." Aaron nodded grimly. "He suspects, but he doesn't know for certain, and he won't risk confronting me directly, not yet. Men like that prefer to work through others or wait for an advantage. What do we do now?" "We prepare," Aaron replied, moving to the cabinet where he kept ammunition. And we get word to Sheriff Tanner that Armstrong has returned with questionable company. Eliza set the revolver on the table and pressed her hands flat against the wood to stop their shaking. "I won't go back to him, Aaron. I'd rather it won't come to that," he interrupted firmly. "I promise you." She looked up at him, vulnerability and determination warring in her expression. "You can't know that. Richard has money connections. He'll twist the truth, make me sound deranged or criminal. Then we'll need witnesses who can testify to your character and his." Aaron moved to her side, covering her hands with one of his own. "Martha and Frank have already shown they're willing to stand with us. And Sheriff Tanner is a fair man who doesn't take kindly to outside trouble." Eliza turned her hand to grasp his. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "not just for myself but for you. Richard is dangerous when crossed." "So am I," Aaron replied quietly. "And unlike him, I'm fighting for something worth protecting." The intensity in his blue eyes sent a shiver through Eliza that had nothing to do with fear. For the first time since fleeing Cheyenne, she allowed herself to believe that escape from Richard might truly be possible, not just temporary evasion, but real freedom to build a new life. Aaron rode to town the following morning, leaving Eliza with strict instructions to bar the door and use the revolver if necessary. The sheriff's office was his first stop, where he found Daniel Tanner reviewing wanted posters at his desk. "Vaughn," the sheriff greeted him with a nod. "Don't often see you in town 2 weeks running." Aaron removed his hat, taking the chair across from Tanner. "Had a visit from Richard Armstrong yesterday, brought a gunman with him." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Figured he might circle back. Man struck me as the persistent type." He set aside the posters. "Did he find what he was looking for?" "He knows she's with me," Aaron replied frankly. "Or strongly suspects it. Tried to bluff his way onto my property but left when I made it clear he wasn't welcome." Tanner studied Aaron thoughtfully. "This woman, is she actually his wife?" "Yes, but she fled for good reason." Aaron met the sheriff's gaze directly. "I've seen the bruises that were still healing when I found her, Tanner, and I've heard enough to know that going back to him would likely mean her death." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Frank Collins said as much when he came to warn me about Armstrong's questions." He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the empty office. "Between you and me, I've sent telegrams to contacts in Wyoming. Armstrong has a reputation, they're respectable businessmen on the surface, but there've been whispers about his treatment of the wife and some questionable business dealings." Relief washed through Aaron. "So you believe her story?" "I'm inclined to," Tanner confirmed. "But that doesn't change the legal situation entirely. She is his wife, and the law gives husbands certain rights that." He held up a hand at Aaron's darkening expression. "I'm just stating facts, not endorsing them. Point is, this needs to be handled carefully." "What do you suggest?" The sheriff considered for a moment. "Keep her out of sight for now. I'll maintain that I haven't seen her, which is technically true. Meanwhile, I'll watch Armstrong and his hired gun. First sign of trouble, I'll intervene. And if he tries to force his way onto my property." "A man has the right to defend his home," Tanner said evenly. "But don't go looking for a fight, Vaughn. Armstrong strikes me as the type who'd be happier using the law against you than facing you man to man." Aaron nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the sheriff's assessment. "Appreciate your help, Tanner. Not doing it for you particularly," the older man replied with the hint of a smile. "Just don't care for men who think money and position put them above decency." Before leaving town, Aaron made 2 more stops, first to the general store for additional supplies, then to the Collins home. Martha welcomed him warmly, insisting he stay for coffee while she packed a basket of fresh bread and preserves for your cousin. "Frank told me about your visitors," she said as they sat at her kitchen table. "That poor girl must be terrified." "She's tougher than she looks," Aaron replied, a note of pride in his voice that didn't escape Martha's notice. "I suspected there was more than cousinly concern in your interest," she observed with a knowing smile. "Not that it's any of my business, of course." Aaron felt heat rise in his face. "It's complicated. Life usually is." Martha refilled his coffee cup. The women's auxiliary is meeting tomorrow at the church. If your cousin would like to attend, several of us would be happy to accompany her there and back. Safety in numbers, as they say. The offer surprised Aaron. I'm not sure it's wise for her to be seen in town just yet. Perhaps not, Martha conceded, but she should know she has friends here. Isolation only adds to fear. Aaron considered this. I'll discuss it with her. Thank you, Martha. Think nothing of it. Now, tell me, how are things otherwise at your ranch? Frank mentioned you might be expanding your herd come spring. The casual shift to normal conversation was a welcome respite from the tension of recent days. By the time Aaron left the Collins home, he felt more centered than he had since Richard Armstrong's appearance. As he rode back to the ranch, Aaron reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in the 2 months since finding Eliza in the snow. The solitary existence he'd built had been comfortable in its simplicity, but now he recognized it for what it truly was: incomplete. Eliza had brought light back into dark corners, purpose beyond mere survival. The sight of smoke rising from his cabin chimney filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the physical comfort it promised. This was home now, in a way it had never been before. And he was determined to protect it. Eliza met him at the door, relief evident in her expression. You're back earlier than I expected. Took care of business quickly. Aaron handed her Martha's basket. The Collins send their regards, along with enough bread to feed a small army. A genuine smile lit her features. They're good people. Martha invited you to the women's auxiliary meeting tomorrow. Aaron hung his hat by the door. Said several ladies would escort you there and back if you wanted to go. Surprise flickered across Eliza's face. Do you think it's safe? Honestly, I'm not certain. Aaron didn't believe in false reassurances. But Martha made a good point about isolation feeding fear, and the sheriff is watching Armstrong. Eliza set the basket on the table, considering. I'd like to go, she said finally. Not just to meet people, but to show Richard I'm not hiding, that I have a community here. Aaron nodded, respecting her decision despite his reservations. I'll ride with you to the Collins place then. Martha can take you from there. The following day dawned bright and clear. Aaron and Eliza set out mid-morning, both armed and watchful. The ride to town passed uneventfully, and Martha welcomed Eliza with a warm embrace that seemed to surprise and touch her deeply. Aaron, you're welcome to wait here with Frank, Martha offered. We shouldn't be more than a couple of hours. Frank emerged from his workshop, wiping soot-stained hands on his apron. Could use an extra pair of hands fixing that wagon axle for the Petersons if you're of a mind to help. Aaron glanced at Eliza, who nodded encouragingly. Go ahead. I'll be fine with Martha and the others. With obvious reluctance, Aaron allowed himself to be led to the blacksmith's forge, though he insisted on keeping his rifle nearby. The physical work provided a welcome distraction, and Frank proved to be both skilled and talkative. Martha says your cousin might be staying in La Junta permanently, he commented as they shaped the hot metal. Taking over the schoolhouse come spring, perhaps. Aaron focused on the task at hand. It's a possibility. Frank grinned knowingly. Town could use a good teacher. And a certain rancher could use some company besides his livestock, if you don't mind my saying so. Seems everyone has an opinion on my personal affairs lately, Aaron replied dryly. The blacksmith laughed. Small towns run on gossip, my friend. Best get used to it. Their work was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Tanner, his expression grim. Armstrong's on the move, he said without preamble. He and Reed were seen heading toward the church just minutes ago. Aaron dropped his tools, reaching for his rifle. Eliza's at the women's meeting. I know, Tanner replied. Got word from Mrs. Peterson when she spotted them from the mercantile. The 3 men moved quickly through town, Aaron's heart pounding with each step. The church stood at the far end of the main street, its white clapboard exterior gleaming in the midday sun. As they approached, Aaron spotted Richard Armstrong and his hired gun mounting the steps to the entrance. Armstrong, the sheriff called out, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "A word, if you please." Richard turned, his surprise quickly masked by a cordial smile. "Sheriff Tanner." What a pleasant coincidence. I was just about to attend the ladies' auxiliary meeting. I understand my wife may be there. "That church meeting is by invitation only," Tanner replied evenly. "And I don't recall the ladies extending one to you or your associate." Armstrong's smile hardened. "As I explained when we last spoke, I'm simply trying to locate my wife, who left our home in a state of considerable distress. Surely you can understand my concern for her welfare." "Your concern is noted," the sheriff said, "but I can't allow you to disrupt a peaceful gathering." Reed shifted his position, his hand hovering near his gun. The movement didn't escape Tanner's notice. "I wouldn't," the sheriff warned quietly, "not unless you're looking to hang." A tense silence fell over the group, broken only when the church door opened and Martha Collins emerged, followed by several other women. Aaron searched the group anxiously, relieved when he spotted Eliza among them. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene on the church steps. "Eliza," Richard called, his voice carrying a false warmth that made Aaron's skin crawl. "My dear, I've been so worried about you." Eliza froze momentarily, then straightened her shoulders and descended the steps with Martha protectively at her side. The other women followed, forming a subtle barrier between her and Richard. "Mr. Armstrong," she acknowledged coldly, "I have nothing to say to you." Richard's facade of concern slipped slightly. "Don't be foolish, Eliza, you're my wife. Your place is at my side in Cheyenne, not in this frontier outpost." "My place," Eliza replied with quiet dignity, "is wherever I choose it to be, and I choose to be here." Aaron moved to stand beside her, his presence both support and statement. Richard's gaze shifted between them, calculation evident in his expression. "I see," he said softly. "So this is the real reason for your flight. Not confusion or hysteria as I'd feared, but adultery." Gasps rose from several of the assembled women. Aaron felt Eliza tense beside him, but noted with pride that she didn't flinch from the accusation. "That's a serious charge, Armstrong," Sheriff Tanner interjected, "one that could damage a lady's reputation irreparably." "It's also completely false," Eliza stated firmly. "Mr. Vaughn saved my life when he found me nearly frozen in the snow. He has been nothing but respectful and honorable during my recovery." Her gaze swept the gathered townspeople. "Unlike my husband, whose idea of marriage includes regular beatings and threats against my life." Murmurs rippled through the crowd that had begun to gather. Martha stepped forward, placing a supportive arm around Eliza's shoulders. "I can personally attest to Miss Armstrong's character," she announced. "She has conducted herself with complete propriety during her time in La Junta." Several other women nodded in agreement, their expressions hardening as they looked at Richard. Aaron recognized the shift in public opinion, a potentially crucial advantage in a small community where reputation carried significant weight. Richard sensed it too. His urbane mask slipped further, revealing the anger beneath. "This is absurd. She is my wife, legally bound to me. Whatever stories she's concocted to justify her abandonment of our marriage, they're not stories," Aaron interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "I saw the bruises when I found her. Half-healed marks that could only have come from a man's hand." Richard's face flushed with fury. I dare to speak the truth," Aaron continued steadily, "and I dare to stand between you and a woman you've terrorized long enough." Reed moved then, his hand dropping to his holster only to freeze as multiple clicks sounded around him. Aaron glanced around in surprise to see several townsmen with weapons drawn, including Frank Collins and two ranchers he recognized from nearby properties. Sheriff Tanner stepped between the groups, his own gun now visible. "That's enough. Mr. Armstrong, I'm afraid I must ask you and your associate to leave La Junta today." "On what grounds?" Richard demanded, though his confidence had visibly faltered. "Disturbing the peace will do for now," Tanner replied. "Though I've received some interesting telegrams from Cheyenne that mention other potential charges worth investigating." Color drained from Richard's face. "What telegrams? Who have you been corresponding with?" "That would be official police business." The sheriff's expression remained impassive. "Now, I suggest you both mount up and ride out. The afternoon train leaves in an hour if you prefer that mode of transportation." For a tense moment, it seemed Richard might challenge the order. Then, with a cold smile that sent a chill down Aaron's spine, he inclined his head in mock deference. "Very well, Sheriff. We'll depart as suggested." His gaze shifted to Eliza, hatred barely concealed. "But this matter is far from settled, my dear. The law recognizes a husband's rights, regardless of what fabrications you've spread among these good people." "The law also recognizes a woman's right to safety," Martha countered sharply, "and we recognize our duty to provide it." Surrounded by the unified front of townspeople, Richard had little choice but to retreat. With a final venomous glare, he gestured to Reed, and the two men moved toward their horses tethered nearby. Sheriff Tanner followed at a discreet distance, clearly intent on ensuring their departure. The crowd gradually dispersed, though several people approached Eliza with words of support and sympathy. Aaron remained at her side, impressed by her composure despite the obvious strain of the confrontation. When they were finally alone, or as alone as one could be on a public street, Eliza released a shuddering breath. "He'll be back," she whispered. "With lawyers or more men, he won't stop." Aaron took her trembling hands in his. "We'll be ready, and you won't face him alone." She looked up at him, vulnerability and gratitude mingling in her expression. "I never expected this, to find people who would stand with me against him." "That's what community means," Aaron said softly, "something I'd forgotten until recently." Martha approached then, her practical manner offering welcome normalcy after the tense confrontation. "You both should come to our house for dinner tonight. No sense being alone at the ranch until we're certain those men have truly left the area." Aaron glanced at Eliza, who nodded her agreement. "Thank you, Martha. We'd be honored." The evening at the Collins home provided a much-needed respite. Frank and Martha proved excellent hosts, their warmth and humor creating an atmosphere where Eliza gradually relaxed. Several other townspeople stopped by throughout the evening, each expressing support and often bringing small gifts, baked goods, jars of preserves, even a handmade quilt from the ladies' auxiliary. "Consider it a welcome to La Junta," Mrs. Peterson explained as she presented the colorful quilt. Every woman in the group contributed a square. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes as she ran her fingers over the intricate stitching. "I don't know what to say. This is so unexpected." "It's what neighbors do," the older woman replied simply. Later, as they prepared to return to the ranch, Sheriff Tanner, having confirmed that Armstrong and Reed had indeed departed on the eastbound train, Aaron found himself deeply moved by the community's response. These were people he'd kept at arm's length for 3 years, yet they had rallied without hesitation to protect someone connected to him. "Ready to head home?" he asked Eliza as she said her goodbyes to Martha. She looked up at him, a soft smile illuminating her face. "Yes, home sounds perfect." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple structure, waiting 4 miles outside town. Aaron helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her, one arm secure around her waist as they rode through the quiet streets. The ranch was undisturbed when they arrived, exactly as they had left it that morning. Yet something had shifted, not in the physical space, but in their perception of it. What had been a temporary shelter for Eliza now held the promise of permanence. Inside, Aaron lit the lamps while Eliza carefully placed her new quilt on the back of a chair. The simple domestic action struck him with unexpected force. This was what he had been missing all these years. Not just companionship, but partnership. Shared purpose. "You should take the bed tonight," Eliza said, breaking into his thoughts. "You've barely slept properly in days." "I'm fine on the sofa," he insisted. "Wouldn't sleep anyway, worrying about Armstrong returning." Eliza moved closer, her expression solemn. "He won't come back tonight." Richard is calculating he'll regroup, consult lawyers, perhaps seek official documents demanding my return. Her hands twisted together anxiously. We have some time, but not much. Aaron recognized the truth in her assessment. Then we'll use that time wisely. He took her restless hands in his. Eliza, I need to ask you something important. She looked up at him, her brown eyes wide with question. Yes. What do you want, not just regarding Armstrong, but for your future, for your life? Aaron held her gaze steadily. Because whatever you decide, I'll support it. Even if it means helping you travel farther west, beyond his reach. Eliza's expression softened. After living in fear for so long, it's strange to consider a future defined by want rather than necessity. She glanced around the cabin that had become her sanctuary. But I know what I want, Aaron. I want to stay, here in La Junta, teaching at the school if they'll have me. Hope rose in Aaron's chest, but he needed absolute clarity, and is that all? A blush colored her cheeks as she understood his meaning. No, she admitted softly, that's not all. Aaron released her hands to gently frame her face. I've never been a man of many words, Eliza, but I need you to hear these. I love you. Not because I found you in the snow or because you brought life back to this place, but because of who you are, your strength, your kindness, your courage. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were different from any she had shed before, bright with joy rather than shadowed by fear. I love you too, she whispered. I think part of me has since I first opened my eyes in this cabin and saw you watching over me. The admission hung in the air between them for a heartbeat before Aaron closed the distance, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. Eliza's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as she returned his kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both breathless, Aaron rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said simply. Not just to protect you from Armstrong, though it would help legally. Marry me because I can't imagine this life without you in it. Eliza's smile was radiant despite the tears still shimmering in her eyes. Yes, she replied without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you, Aaron Vaughn. Sheriff Tanner performed the ceremony 3 days later in the town church, with Frank and Martha Collins serving as witnesses. The news of Richard Armstrong's treatment of his wife had spread through La Junta, transforming what might have been a scandalous situation into a community's determination to protect one of their own. The sheriff had received additional telegrams from Cheyenne, suggesting Armstrong's business dealings, had drawn the attention of federal investigators' information that provided another layer of security for the newly married couple. Though divorce from Richard would eventually be necessary for complete legal clarity, Tanner assured them that the evidence of abuse and abandonment would make it possible, if challenging. Spring arrived with a vigor that matched the renewal in their lives. Aaron expanded his herd as planned, while Eliza took over teaching duties at the small schoolhouse. Their cabin underwent transformation as well, new curtains at the windows, bookshelves built to accommodate their combined literary interests, a vegetable garden twice the size of Aaron's previous efforts. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Eliza placed her hand over Aaron's. I received a letter today, she said quietly. From my brother in Boston. Aaron turned to her in surprise. You wrote to your family. She nodded, a mixture of anxiety and hope in her expression. After our wedding, I thought they should know I was safe and happy. What did your brother say? Aaron asked, covering her hand with his. He's coming west. Next month. Eliza's voice trembled slightly. He wants to meet you and see where I'm living, and he says my parents miss me, though they're still struggling to understand everything that happened with Richard. Aaron squeezed her hand reassuringly. Then we'll welcome him, show him that you've found a good life here. We have, haven't we? Eliza looked around at the ranch that had become their shared home. Found a good life, I mean. The best, Aaron agreed, drawing her close. Though it's only just beginning. As twilight deepened around them, Aaron reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The solitary existence he had once embraced now seemed hollow compared to the richness of sharing his life with Eliza. She had brought warmth not just to his cabin, but to his heart, melting the protective ice he'd built around it just as surely as spring thawed the winter snow. And in her eyes, he saw the promise of all the seasons yet to come, the steady heat of summer, the golden abundance of autumn, even the quiet renewal of winter. No longer something to endure alone, but a cycle to be embraced together. 1 year later, on a December evening with snow falling gently outside, Aaron returned from the barn to find Eliza waiting with news that completed their happiness. The doctor had confirmed she was expecting their first child, due in the summer. "A family of our own," Aaron whispered in wonder as he held her close. "Something I never thought to have." "Nor I," Eliza admitted. "Not after everything with Richard." "He can't hurt us anymore," Aaron reminded her. The divorce had finally been granted 2 months earlier after Richard's arrest for financial crimes had weakened his standing sufficiently to prevent further legal challenges. "I know." Eliza's smile was serene, free of the shadows that had once haunted her. "That part of my life is over. This," she placed his hand on her still flat stomach, "this is our future." Their son, William Frank Vaughn, was born the following July, his lusty cries announcing a healthy pair of lungs and a strong will. As Aaron held his newborn son while Eliza rested, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed in the span of 18 months, from solitude to family, from emptiness to fulfillment, from mere existence to a life overflowing with purpose and love. And it had all begun with a snowstorm that had nearly claimed Eliza's life, but had instead given them both a second chance. What some might call coincidence, Aaron recognized as providence, the hand of fate that had guided him to that particular snowdrift on that particular evening. 2 years later, their daughter Elizabeth Martha joined the family, her arrival coinciding with the completion of the larger house Aaron had built adjacent to the original cabin. The old structure remained standing, a testament to beginnings, and a reminder of the journey that had brought them to this point. La Junta continued to grow with the railroad's expansion, and the Vaughn Ranch prospered along with it. Eliza's position at the school evolved into that of headmistress as student numbers increased, though she scaled back her duties during her pregnancies and the children's early years. Their home became a gathering place for friends and family, Eliza's brothers and parents eventually visiting from the east, local ranchers and townspeople joining them for holidays and celebrations, even travelers passing through who found welcome at their table. On the 5th anniversary of the day Aaron had found Eliza in the snow, they stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard with the family dog. The ranch had expanded to include more cattle, a small orchard, and several hired hands who lived in bunkhouses nearby. "Did you ever imagine this?" Eliza asked, leaning against her husband's solid frame. "When you were alone here, did you ever picture such a life?" Aaron's arm tightened around her waist. "No," he admitted honestly. "I thought I'd made my peace with solitude. Believed it was all I deserved after everything in St. Louis. And now," he turned to face her, his blue eyes warm with the love that had only deepened with passing years. "Now I understand that sometimes the things we think we want aren't what we truly need." His hand caressed her cheek. "You taught me that, Eliza, you and the children and this life we've built." "We taught each other," she corrected gently, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "And we keep learning every day." As their children's laughter filled the air around them, Aaron silently thanked the bitter cold that had brought this extraordinary woman to his door. What had begun as a rescue had transformed into redemption for them, both a second chance neither had expected, but both had embraced with all their hearts. The solitary man who had once sought only isolation had found something infinitely more valuable in the arms of the woman he'd saved from the snow. A home defined not by walls or land, but by love that warmed even the coldest of days.